Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is a video series I do in which I talk about older board game gems. I don't want these games to be forgotten. Although the game I'm covering this time is not going to be forgotten. It's a classic Chinese card game, and you can play it with just a regular deck of cards. The game is called Dou Dizhǔ, and it's that translates to Fight the Landlord. And it's a 3-player card game in which one player, every round, all the cards are dealt out, and then players bid on who is the landlord. The landlord gets extra cards and goes first, which is a big thing. The goal being to get rid of all their cards. The other 2 players are working together to keep the landlord from getting out first. It's a great 3-player card game. And it's been hobbyfied. What I mean by that is, there's a lot of fans in the hobby who love Tichu. So Tichu is not a Chinese card game, but it is influenced by that style of the Chinese climbing or ladder card games. But the designer's Swiss. So Tichu is sort of like a hobbyfied version of some of those classic Chinese card games. And Ralph H. Anderson did the same thing with Dou Dizhǔ, making a game called Chimera. Now, this is the edition that came out in 2014 by Z-Man. It came out again in 2017 as Chimera and More from Eagle Gryphon. Chimera is naturally, like Dou Dizhǔ, is a 3-player card game, although Chimera and More adds rules for 5 players and extra cards to support 5 players. I've never played at 5 players. To me, it's a classic 3-player game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to play Dou Dizhǔ first, just with a regular deck of cards. And then I'll talk about the differences with Chimera. They're almost exactly the same game, but technically Dou Dizhǔ is a betting game, and this converts it more into getting the most points. Before the game starts, give each player a certain number of currency. I suppose you could gamble. It's framed like a typical Chinese gambling game. Of course, you can play with just poker chips. Give each player the same number of poker chips to start. And then you're going to take a deck of cards, a regular deck of cards, including the jokers, so 54. You're going to shuffle up this deck. Now, in the original rules, they actually say to have one of the players cut the deck and then flip over a card face up, put it again like that, and then each player takes turns drawing cards to make up their hand, with the player who draws the face up card being the player who starts the bidding. We usually don't bother. We usually just shuffle them up and deal all the cards to the players except 3 cards to set to the side. In each hand of play, one player will be the landlord. Players bid for that role. That player is trying to get out before either of the other 2 players. The other 2 players are working together to keep the landlord from going out first. So it doesn't matter which of the other 2 players gets out first, either way the landlord loses. And then based on the initial bid, plus potentially what happens during the hand, the loser or losers will pay the winner or winners from their holdings. You can't really play to a set point value or anything, but you can set a time limit, or you can play X number of hands, and then whoever has the most points or money at the end, you can say is the winner. So each hand starts with a shuffling of the deck, deal out 3 cards, and put those to the side, and you can deal out the rest of the cards amongst all the players. Each player has a chance to look at their hand, and then starting with whoever you determine to be the start player, you start with a bid, and the bid can be 1, 2, or 3, or you can pass. We usually take turns being the start player for bidding. The start player will either pass or bid 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the highest possible bid. So if a player bids 3, that's it, the auction is over, they're the landlord. But if they bid something else like 1, then it goes to the next player it's a Chinese card game, so generally they're supposed to go counterclockwise. We usually play clockwise, like a typical Western card game. But anyway, the next player in turn order can raise the bid or pass, It continues until somebody bid and then both players after that passed, or somebody bids 3. Regardless, whoever has the highest bid becomes the landlord. They take the 3 spare cards and add them to their hand of 17, so they have a total of 20 cards to start. And what we usually do is we take the bidding amount and just have the landlord put that kind of in front to remind everybody what the bid is. Keep in mind, it is actually possible during the game for this bid to grow. At the end of the game, if the landlord wins, each of the other players will have to pay this amount to the landlord. If the landlord loses, they have to pay this amount to each of the other 2 players. This is a Chinese climbing game, otherwise known as a ladder game. If you're not familiar with that, it's a little bit similar to a trick-taking game, but instead of each player playing exactly 1 card, each player can play a combination of cards. The starting player chooses the type of combination, lays out the card or cards in front of them, and then each player in turn order either passes or plays the same combination but of a higher value. If it was a single card, like a jack, then if you want to stay in, you would have to play a higher card, like a queen or king. You can pass, and if it comes back around to you, you can jump back in. So for example, it can be possible that somebody starts with a low card, and you have no lowish cards, you only have high cards, so you pass, then other players play. You get something like this, and then this player's turn again, they play a queen, and now this person, okay, now I'm going to jump in, I'm going to play a king. And this continues until 2 players pass in a row. And then the last player, which was the last person to play a card or cards, wins the trick, I suppose. But the cards aren't worth anything in Dou Dizhǔ. You don't have to collect them, you can just push them to the side. The real value is being able to lead the next trick. And of course, by choosing what combination you want. So the big part of the game is trying to figure out how you're going to play your cards and in what combinations in order to be able to get out first. Of course, you are limited by the combinations that other players are choosing to play. There's a lot of combinations in Dou Dizhǔ. It's a normal deck of cards, except for the 2s. The 2s are special. They are higher than the aces. So actually the sequence of cards goes from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king, ace, 2, and then the jokers. The lesser joker, I suppose, and the greater joker. The black and white one we say is the lesser one, and the colored one is the best joker. So in terms of singletons, single cards, that's the order. 3 through ace, then 2, lesser joker, greater joker. You have to try to remember that the 2 is kind of out of sequence. So you can't make a straight with 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The 2 is out of sequence, and you can consider it to have no number. In fact, that's one of the changes they make in Chimera. They call them hunters and put an H here to make it very obvious that they're not part of the sequence. So what are some of the combinations? You can, of course, play a single card. You can play a pair. Suits don't matter in this game, by the way. You can play a triplet. You can play a triplet plus 1 additional card. You can play a triplet and a pair. You can play sequential pairs, like so. But you would need at least 3. You know how a straight has to be at least 5 cards? That's how you remember. If you're playing sequential pairs or sequential triplets, you can do that too. The number of cards in that set has to be at least 5. So you can't play 2 sequential pairs, that's only 4 cards, but you could play 3. You can play sequential triplets. And in this case, 2 is enough, but they have to be in order, in sequential order, next to each other. You can play 2 triplets and 2 singletons. You can play 2 sequential triplets along with 2 pairs. As you can see, they can get pretty fancy. Of course, you can do a run. So again, the run would have to be at least 5 cards. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But it can be as long as you want. And if you want to beat such a run, you have to play the same number of cards, but starting with a higher value. So if one player plays 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can play a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Remember, 2s cannot be played in sequence, they're special. You can play a 4 of a kind. Interestingly, you can play 4 of a kind just by itself, and you can add singletons or pairs in addition to those, but it's also a bomb. If you've played Tichu, you are familiar with the concept of the bomb, but be careful. In Dou Dizhǔ, you cannot play bombs out of turn. You can only play them when it's your turn. And bombs and rockets, this pair is called a rocket, will beat anything, and it doesn't have to match a combination. So you can play a bomb, 4 of a kind, on anything, except of course a lower bomb. And if another player wants to beat that, they have to play a higher bomb, or a rocket, which is the highest possible hand and beats any bomb. Getting a rocket is actually much easier than getting a bomb. Even though it's so easy to get, it's the most powerful hand in the game because these individually are also quite powerful. So you have to decide whether to play them together as a rocket or play them individually as the best singletons. You remember at the beginning I said somebody will bid an amount and they become the landlord? We put that bid out here to show how much they bid, and that's how much they pay or are paid by the other players if they lose or win. Every time somebody plays a bomb or a rocket, that bid is doubled. So picture the situation where you're losing a hand, but you have a bomb. You're worried if you play the bomb, you might still lose. You might not want to play that bomb because it's going to increase the bid, and therefore if you still lose, you're going to end up paying more than if you hadn't played the bomb at all. After somebody wins a hand, those cards go away. The player who won the hand then leads a new trick with another combination, any combination they want of single or multiple cards, and this continues until one player gets rid of all their cards. If that's the landlord, then the other players have to pay the landlord each the amount of the landlord's bid. If it's one of the other players, then the landlord has to pay that bid to each of the other players. And then play another hand. Play until you get bored. That's it, you're ready to play Dou Dizhǔ. Chimera is a specialized version of Dou Dizhǔ played with a special deck. The deck is exactly the same as a regular deck of cards, except they went ahead and changed all the 2s to H's, hunters, to make it obvious that they are not part of any sequence. The rules are slightly different, and you can play Dou Dizhǔ by Chimera rules if you want, and vice versa. Unlike Dou Dizhǔ, which is essentially a betting game, a gambling game, Chimera is played for points. Again, just like Dou Dizhǔ, at the start of every hand you shuffle the deck, and again, what you're supposed to do is cut the deck and then flip over one card face up, and then players take turns drawing the cards until somebody gets that face up card, and then they're going to start the bidding. Again, we usually don't bother, we just deal out all the cards, except for 3. So just like in Dou Dizhǔ, once every player has a chance to look at their cards, their 17 cards, then they will take turns bidding. And you bid with points. You can bid 20, 30, or 40 points. Again, 40, like the 3 in Dou Dizhǔ, is the maximum bid. If somebody bids 40, they are automatically the Chimera. The other players are the hunters. But just like Dou Dizhǔ, you continue the bidding around until everybody passes except for 1 or somebody bids 3. That player is going to take these 3 cards from the Chimera's den and add them to their hand, and they will start the game. In Chimera, the hunters, that is the players who are not the Chimera, may be allowed to exchange cards. If the bid is 20, no cards are exchanged. If the bid is 30, then each hunter will slip one card. They choose the card and they slip it to their partner, and their partner slips them a card. You choose the card to give up before you see what card you're getting. And if the bid was 40, then the teammates, the hunters, get to exchange 2 cards. It plays pretty much exactly the same as Dou Dizhǔ, with only a couple of tweaks. In Chimera, they number the cards 1 through 12 instead of 3 through king, and the 2s are hunters. One interesting change is that all the 11s and all the 2s are worth a certain number of points. The player who wins the trick takes all the cards of that trick, and at the end of the round, they will gain points for these cards that have been collected. This is the Greater Joker, which in this game is called the Chimera. This is the Lesser Joker, which is called the Piya. And you'll notice these symbols up here. In Chimera, unlike Dou Dizhǔ, the Piya, the Lesser Joker, can be used as a wild card, a wild value. It can be any value you want, 1 through 12, for the purpose of making a sequence. Again, you can still play them together as a rocket, or in this case, they call it a Chimera flight. One slight change is that in this edition, Chimera and More, they changed it so you can play a pair of pairs, a sequence of 2 pairs. Whereas in Dou Dizhǔ and in the rules of the first edition of Chimera, you needed at least 3. I still go by 3 because that's the traditional way. That's the way it's done in Dou Dizhǔ. But otherwise, the possible sets you can make are identical. The hand ends when one player gets rid of all their cards. The hand immediately ends. Any cards that were played face up that play, in which the player gets out first, they collect all the cards that have been played, so they will still get points for those. And then you score. If the Chimera gets out first, they win the hand. First, they score double the points of their bid. So if they bid 30, they will gain 60 points. In addition, they'll gain a bonus 25 points for each Chimera flight or rocket that was played, as well as every 4 of a kind played as a trap, which in Dou Dizhǔ and Tichu they call a bomb. And they score a bonus 25 points if they get out before one of the hunters even was able to play any cards. And of course, players will score any of these cards that they collected. All the players do. If the hunters win, so one of the hunters got out first before the Chimera loses their bid, so if they bid 30, they will lose 30 points. Each of the hunters will gain 20 points, and it doesn't matter how many traps or Chimera, or if a Chimera flight was played. Those bonuses don't count in the case where the hunters win. You still score for these cards. Write down the scores, play another hand. You can play to a set total. I think the rulebook suggests 400. That's it. You're ready to play Chimera, 3 players. This edition actually also includes extra cards, allows you to play a 5-player game of Chimera. I've never played that. I'm probably never gonna get to it. So Dou Dizhǔ and Chimera are partnership games, sort of, semi-partnership. Because in a 3-player game, one player is playing against the other 2, but every round, those partnerships potentially can change. I like that more than sort of a straight-up partnership game, like something like Tichu, in which you have the same partners every round. Sometimes you won't have a partner. Sometimes you'll have a different partner than you did last time in Dou Dizhǔ. And I like Dou Dizhǔ for that reason, because every hand ends up being a little bit different. Sometimes you're playing to be the landlord. You think you have a strong hand. Sometimes you're partnering with one player and you have a strong hand, so you're trying to get out first. And sometimes you're partnering with another player, maybe a different player, and this time you have a weak hand and you're trying to help your teammate get out first. Instead of the landlord, of course, then you both win. Dou Dizhǔ is a pure betting game. So the way Chinese betting games usually work is there isn't exactly like a pot that players contribute to, and then somebody gets the whole pot. Instead, players at the end of the game or end of the hand have a responsibility to pay the winner a certain amount, and that amount can be different based on how well the winner did. So, for example, in Mahjong, they often have different valued scoring hands. So any number of these types of hands will allow you to go out first and win the hand. But depending on whether you have certain wind tiles or what have you, you can get extra points. And so then the betting players have a responsibility to pay extra. Dou Dizhǔ is exactly the same way as that, in that there's a bid to be landlord, and that bid can be 1, 2, or 3. Of course, that could be $100, $200, $300, right? You can make it, or 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents. You can make it whatever you want, but it's expected to be money, usually. Of course, you can just use poker chips. And that bid is the default payout, but when bombs or rockets are played, that increases the bid and increases the risk. And this is a really clever thing that I love. So you have a bomb, that's good. You have a bomb in your pocket, that's great. You can play that anytime you want and have better chances of winning. But what if you're already losing? When you play a bomb, that's going to help. But what if you still lose? If you lose anyway, even though you played the bomb, you made it worse, because that increases the amount of money you have to pay out at the end of the hand. So bombs are powerful, but they're also risky plays. There have been situations where I had a bomb and I deliberately did not play it because I foresaw that I was going to lose anyway, and so I'm trying to hang on to more of my money, not lose as much of my money. Those sorts of plays are interesting, but they kind of need a gambling situation, right? It's that risk versus reward. It's chasing bad money after good. It's sunk cost fallacies. It's betting good money after bad. These are the sorts of things that happen in a gambling game. And of course, you don't have to gamble real money, but when it's in a gambling format, it creates certain pushes and pulls of the decision-making process, because you're not just trying to win, you're trying to win and win a lot of money, which might require actually a different play style than just trying to win. There are lots of interesting decisions in Dou Dizhǔ. You, of course, are deciding when you look at your hand at the start of the hand, you're looking at your cards and going, should I bid for Landlord? Of course, if I do bid for Landlord, how much? I bid 10, somebody else bids 20, the other player passes. Should I bid 30? Is my hand strong enough for that? Of course, there are 3 extra cards. I don't know what they are. But if I take them, by being the landlord, maybe that'll help me. Maybe I have 3 of a kind, and maybe the 4th is in those 3 cards. So if I'm going to take a chance and bet 30, be the landlord, get those cards, hope to complete a bomb. These are sort of the things you have to think about. During the hand, your cards, your hand of cards is going to make up, various combinations, but there's multiple ways of putting those together. You might have a really strong run, for example, 7 cards, 8 cards, 9 cards. And if you can start a play, like be the start player once, then you can lead with that, and likely nobody else will be able to beat you. Of course, it's fun when they do. One funny thing about runs is, and bombs actually, is if you have one, it's more likely that other players will also have one. There's been situations where I've had like a hand that I could almost make a complete run, right? But I know I'm never going to be able to play all that. So I have to break it up, and I have to decide how to break it up, right? If I never am able to start a trick, then I'm never going to have a chance to play that amazing combination. The combos are pretty crazy in this game. So there's lots of them. So there's, besides singletons, playing single cards, there's pairs, there's triplets with a single card, there's triplets with a pair, the full house, there's sequential pairs, like a pair of 4s, a pair of 5s, a pair of 6s. You can play 2 or more sequential triplets. 2 sequential triplets with 2 singletons. Quads. You can play 4 of a kinds. You could play 2 sequential 4 of a kinds and 2 pairs. An amazing hand. But a 4 of a kind is also a bomb. Now, unlike in Tichu, you can't play a bomb outside of your turn. But like in Tichu, a bomb will beat anything. Generally, you won't want to break up a bomb if you can help it. Unless it was like a bomb of 2s or something, then 2s are really good. 2s are the best cards. That might be hard for people to remember. That 2s are the best cards. You have to think of it like, ace is actually a 1, right? So it's 1 through king. And someone somewhere decided that actually the ace beats the king. The lowest card beats the highest, and now the ace is the highest. And somehow that became normal. And now this one, the 2 is now the highest. But you can't make a straight with the 2. Anyway, so you got the bomb, 4 of a kind, which is going to be beaten by another bomb, and that's the only combination you can play that's not matching a combination somebody already plays. Somebody plays a pair, you can still drop a bomb. But on top of the bomb, there's the rocket. The rocket is the best. That's the 2 jokers. A rocket will beat any bomb. But it's 2 jokers. And the 2 jokers are the 2 highest cards in the game. And it's very, very tempting to break up a rocket. Especially if the win if you're not super confident in the win. Because if you play it as a rocket, you're going to increase that bid, right? So it's very tempting. You may have to break up the rocket. It keeps the bid from going higher, which is good if you're not super confident in the win. And you might actually have an easier time getting out because those are the best single cards that can be played. It is always interesting when people are playing single cards and then somebody plays the lesser joker, the black and white joker, and people are looking around like, is somebody going to play the greater joker, right? The colorful joker. And if nobody does, it's like, oh, I bet that player just broke up a rocket. So my family and I, my wife and my son and I, we play Dou Dizhǔ all the time. It's a super, super popular game. So when I found out that they made a hobby sort of version of it, like what they did with Tichu, I had to pick it up. So we got Chimera, designed by Ralph H. Anderson, who in one of the rule books said he was inspired by Chinese card games like Big Two and such and such and such and such, and Fight the Landlord. And it's like, it's Fight the Landlord. It is that game. He took Dou Dizhǔ and he made it more of a hobby game in that you're playing for points instead of it being a gambling game. And with a dedicated deck, which is nice, because the 2s can be confusing to people. They might try to make a straight or run with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you have to remind them, no, actually the 2 is actually better than what you're using it for. Maybe you don't tell them. So the custom decks in Chimera are nice, even for just that reason, in that they replace the 2s with H's, hunters. So it makes it very clear, being a letter, not a number, that you can't use these in sequence. There are also no Jack, Queens, or Kings. I think it's numbered 1 to 12, and then the H, right? So it's clear that you can't use the H as part of a sequence. So even for that reason alone, it's a great way to play Dou Dizhǔ with beginners. It's a little bit easier to internalize at least that part of it. Now, being a game designed in and of itself, with starting with Dou Dizhǔ as an inspiration and then adding to it, tweaking it. Let's talk about some of those changes. Are they good? Are they bad? Some of them are interesting. So the most interesting one to me is that they have 2 cards, 2 values, the 2s and the 11s, which are worth points. Do you know in Tichu, I think it's the 5s, the 10s, and the kings, maybe? It's been a while since I played Tichu, actually. You're trying to get out. That's generally a good thing, but you're also trying to get points, and you get points from collecting certain cards. The 5s, the 10s, the kings, I think. Those are the ones that give you points. And they did the same thing. He did the same thing in Chimera. So the 2s and the 11s score you points. That adds an interesting wrinkle, because normally in the 3-player hand of Dou Dizhǔ, 1 player is against the other 2, and the other 2 players are working completely cooperatively. they will always work together. Their single goal is to keep the landlord from getting out first. But because some of the cards are worth points and each player has their own individual score tallied up over the course of the whole game over multiple hands, there can be a little bit of a pull there on the part of players to, well, that my partner is winning this trick and I could let them win the trick, but maybe I'll win this trick. I mean, we're still doing well, right? But that allows me to get those points. So it just adds a little bit of tension between the two partners. Not much, but enough to make it interesting. So that's a neat change. Of course, there is the change to points in general, which, when you're playing a modern board game is probably better. You probably don't want to feel like you're playing a gambling game. So instead you play for points. And you still bid points. But one interesting thing is, like in Dou Dizhǔ, when you play a bomb or a rocket, you increase the bid, and that increases the risk for both sides. It increases the payout that the loser has to do, whether the loser is the landlord or the other side. But in Chimera, playing a bomb or a rocket, which in this game they call a trap and a flight, it only increases the risk for the landlord, the Chimera player. I'm not super convinced about that change. It's fine. It's just different. It's not better or worse. But it's interesting to see some of these things which seem obviously influenced by Tichu kind of creeping into Chimera a little bit. So one is the point values on certain cards, and another is the ability to pass cards to your teammate. Unless the bid for Chimera is the lowest possible bid, then the teammates will be exchanging cards with each other. So I will take a card from my hand, pass it face down to my teammate does the same for me. A little bit interesting. It doesn't, to me, it's not better or worse, it's just different, and it seems obviously taken from Tichu again. So in normal Dou Dizhǔ, the two jokers are identical, just one is worth more than the other. So you could argue that the lesser joker isn't useful at all, because if somebody plays it, then whoever has the greater joker can just play it right on top of it, right? Of course, useful for making the rocket or whatever. But the designer, very interestingly, added an extra ability for that lesser joker. Made it a wild card for the purpose of making runs, sequences. I don't like it as much, but I have to admit that's probably just my familiarity with Dou Dizhǔ talking. My familiarity with Dou Dizhǔ kind of biases me a little bit. If I learned Chimera first and then had to learn Dou Dizhǔ, I'd probably be complaining about the differences, right? But I mean, because Dou Dizhǔ can be played with just a regular deck of cards, it's easy to just try by yourself, right? Give it some plays, see how you like it. But if you want to buy it, here it is, Chimera. Now, the advantage of Chimera is it's a special deck with the twos replaced with hunters, so there's no confusion about whether they can be played in a sequence or not. Of course, these are double deck boxes, so they're extra large, larger than a regular deck of cards would be. But they do come with score pads. From my memory, this score pad is not very good. This one's better. So this one came out 2014, Z-Man. This one came out 2017, Eagle Griffin. When I started this video, I was about to recommend, hey, the Chimera and More box is smaller, go with that. But when I look at it here, it's not that much smaller, right? Because it's still a double box, because Chimera and More includes extra cards, I think 2 extra suits, that allows you to play this up to 5 players. Up to 5. 3 or 5. Not 4. If you want to play 4-player Chimera, you just play Tichu, right? I think that's the thought process. It's interesting that Z-Man chose to make the cards look just like Tichu cards. The suits are identical to the Tichu suits. And that's interesting because you have this double box, and inside, besides the score pad here, I mean, that's it, right? Only 1 deck of cards. But, you know what you could do? If you have Tichu, just put Tichu in there too. Now you got your bases covered for 3 or 4 players. The Chimera box is smaller. The notepad is better from my memory, but it comes with extra cards for being able to play with 5 players. I don't have any strong opinion about the quality of the cards. Both editions will do you. They're completely fine. If you are a fan of Tichu, I would say seek out this version. It's a very nice presentation, this one. It's kind of shiny in places. I feel it's really, really quite charming. I like the presentation of the box on this one more than that one. But of course, personal preference, right? Fake Chinese English text font here, whatever. Even though I normally just play Dou Dizhǔ and I just play with a regular deck of cards, I'm still going to keep Chimera, and I'm going to keep this edition. But both editions will do you. This one has the advantage of the more, which is a way to play Chimera, 5 players. Never done it. And honestly, I don't think I'm ever going to get to it. I just feel like Chimera Dou Dizhǔ is a 3-player game. And it's one of the best 3-player card games out there. Honestly. So you really should try it, especially if you're a fan of Tichu. Now, if you love Tichu, that doesn't mean you're going to like Chimera, because of course it's going to be a little bit different in certain ways, like not being able to play bombs out of turn order. That might bug you. Just whenever you're a huge fan of something, somebody says, oh, if you like this, you may like this too, and then you try it and the differences really stand out. But if you like Tichu, but you're not like a super fan, and you want more games like Tichu, absolutely you should seek out Chimera. Or again, just get a regular deck of cards, try Dou Dizhǔ, see how that does you. Now, in the talk of 3-player card games, another one that gets mentioned often is Haggis. It's another Chinese-style climbing game or ladder game. The designer is actually local to me, lives in Vancouver. I have not played that in years. I don't feel comfortable making a comparison. I will say that this one, because it hews more closely to an existing Chinese card game, it was much easier for my Chinese wife to pick it up. So it's this or Dou Dizhǔ. Really no preference between the two. They both work great for us as a family. But when I tried to teach, and again, this was years ago now, me and my wife tried to play Haggis together, and she did not like Haggis. But the reason specifically was because it changes some of the conventions of classic Chinese card games. And so if you've played a lot of those, playing Haggis is going to be weird. But if you don't have much familiarity with Chinese card games, you're not going to notice that problem. So Haggis is a very good option as well. But I just can't compare them because it's been way too long since I played Haggis. I do hope to cover Haggis at some point. And this is a minor thing too about Chimera, is that in this edition, the way they've structured the rules is they have the default rules for 3 players, and then where it's different for 5 players, they add additional text in among the regular text. The regular text is black. The additional text is like dark purple. And I had so much difficulty reading the rules for this as a result, because it just all blurred together to me. And it's a great light, and I'm reading this, and I'm having the hardest time. It's really unfortunate. And that's another reason probably why I still prefer this one, stick to this one. And I even prefer the rule about 3 pairs, at least, in a sequence, instead of the 2 pairs of this one. That's just because it hews closer to Dou Dizhǔ, which I'm more familiar with. But if you're not familiar with Dou Dizhǔ, but you want to buy like a boxed version of it, either of these editions would do you. I don't really have a preference really between the two. They're both essentially the same game. This is the one I'll be keeping myself. This one will go in the restaurant. And of course, we still have our deck of cards for playing regular Dou Dizhǔ. If you've liked Tichu in the past, and you're looking for similar games, you absolutely 100% need to check out Chimera. Or Dou Dizhǔ, just try it with a regular deck of cards. One of the two might do you. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Dou Dizhǔ don't stop being good just because newer games come out. Take care.